welcome everybody for joining us this year at the launch of the new STM Trends, as we're presenting it to you. And I see a lot of familiar faces in the audience. That's very good, welcome back. But I also see a few new faces. So let me start by explaining how all of this works. Every year, STM publishes the trends, a forecast for the next 3 to 5 years of the most impactful changes and change agents that we foresee that will impact our industry. And we've been doing this more than 10 years now. And instead of writing a fat report that nobody will probably read, we try to capture it all in one image and give it a certain theme. And the theme of this year is the beauty of open at scale. And let me show you the picture of this year. Let's see. Yeah, there we are. This is the full infographic. And as you can see, this is a field of open sunflowers. And the theme is open and the scheme is at scale. And you see it is a vast field where the sunflowers are the platforms where all these open information will appear. And before I take you on a guided tour through this field, let me explain a little more about the process. This is really the result of collaboration at work. We make these forecasts by assembling, bringing together around 25 to 30 representatives of STM members. They're mainly staff working in innovations, in technology, in strategy, business development, platforms, IT. And in the past, we used to lock ourselves up for half a day or sometimes even a full day in London. You see a picture there below, and had a lively discussion. Of course, the past 2 years during the pandemic, we were forced to do this via Zoom. Still also a very engaging event, as you can see on the left side. Zoom made it a little different, although we still kept to the same methods. We used the so-called Delphi method, that forecasting technique especially used for technology forecasts. And the basis of it is that you bring experts together. So we regard all the people from the senior people from our member companies as the experts about academic publishing. And you bring the experts together, they express their views, and then you use several discussion rounds to bring those views to a consensus. So first we look at the differences and the different areas that people want to emphasize. And then via the discussion rounds, we seek that consensus. And you can see below how that happened in the past, where we scribbled 1,000 ideas on different flip charts. And now via Zoom, we try to structure our discussions a bit more via little surveys that we then put in Wordles. And you see a few Wordles here of this year's version. You see a lot of open there, you see a lot about platforms there, and a lot about OA, and that's exactly what you'll find in the main picture. To refresh your memories a little bit on previous editions, because people always ask that question, I've put a few here from the past, and I chose, of course, the ones that were particularly spot on. In the middle, you see one that we made 5 years ago, which gave a prediction with a time horizon for this year. So I thought it would be nice to take that one out first. And 5 years ago, we made a prediction about how important AI would become in our area. You know, it says entering the AI era. And in the head of the publisher, you see all the different areas where AI would play a role. And outside the head, you see all the challenges that they could help solve us as publishers. Another nice one to take out is already 8 years old. That's the left top one. And it predicted the importance of research data. Well, we all know how that came through. The bottom left one is of 2 years ago, and particularly put emphasis on the universe of the new user, the new generation users who has never lived without internet, and who also, as a result of that, want to treat their information differently and want to get their information provided to them in a different way, much easier, much more personalized. They want to be treated as a digi native, etc. The lower right one on the bottom is the one of last year, where the emphasis was on infrastructure and especially on the flow of research outputs, the many different research outputs. And the motto was, let's go upstream. And along the border of that river, and the river depicts all the research flow as we know it, all the flow of research outputs. Along the border of that river, you see a lot of infrastructure where publishers play an important role, from peer review to the provision of research data and checking research reproducibility, and of course matters of trust and integrity. So with this refresh of previous editions, let's jump into the edition of this year. And here's the cheerful, sunny flower field again. And I would like to say first that this is a picture about open access, but it's not a picture about business models, transformative agreements, about the political fuzz around the requirements that funders pose. This is really a picture about how, in essence, scholarly communications will change if so much content will be available in an open way. And first and foremost, there will be a lot of pluriformity between platforms, and there will also be platform proliferation. And you can see that in the sunflowers in the front. Let me show them to you. There are different sunflowers there. On the top left, let's start with the publisher platforms. The publisher platforms try to attract the authors. The authors are here depicted as bees. And we also forecast or predict that there will be much more competition for getting the best authors and the best peer reviewers. And in the petals of the flower, you can see how publisher platforms will try to compete with each other and what they will try to offer in a really demonstrably superior way to their authors. And so, for example, there's the quality, the peer review, but also being very workflow focused, offering it all in a fast and easy way, being intuitive, being very author-centric, offering new metrics, etc. In that sense, the publisher platform is distinctively different from the discovery platform. The discovery platform will, in an open world, bring together the content of many different publishers. And so the hardwiredness that we now have for content on publisher platforms will probably disappear. And there will be a lot of syndication of content, as you can see on one of the petals. And the discovery platforms that will win, or that are likely to win, are the ones that offer easy sharing, easy collaboration, a lot of versions of record as the gold standard. They must offer a place that is trusted, that offers all kinds of research outputs, data, etc. And in that sense, there will also be a difference between these discovery platforms and what we now have seen emerge as piracy platforms, which you see on the right top hand of the picture. And you see in our picture, the piracy platforms are withering away. They're not a very attractive flower, also because a lot of what happens there is illegal. There's data abuse, there's theft, there's a lot of fake science there. There should be a lot of mistrust. Also, they are bombarded with takedown notices. So not a good place to be. And the question is, of course, if the majority of content is available as open access, do piracy platforms still have a role to play, or will they wither away more or less automatically? So these are three kinds of platforms that you're already familiar with, but I want to stipulate that they may change and probably will change their profile in an open world, in an open environment. In the bottom line, you see three kinds of platforms that are likely to take a stronger role and that will take a more important place. For example, on the left bottom, you see preprint servers. We've already seen the importance of preprint servers go up, especially influenced by, for example, the COVID pandemic and all the early papers that appeared there on COVID, but also in the context of climate change. And particularly younger and newer generations are attracted to preprint servers because they offer immediacy and they offer the possibility of early claims. But of course, on preprint servers, the stuff is not peer-reviewed. It is very popular, but not peer-reviewed. It gets there fast, but it's not peer-reviewed. In that sense, it's also important to look at the middle flower of the social media, because social media have become important also, especially for non-researchers who want to stay up to date in science. And we can also see an alliance between preprint servers and social media, where early publications appear on the preprint servers and get broadcasted via the social media. Another important platform is the platforms launched by institutes. And they, of course, promote the publish your own stuff. They do that to raise their own branding, to raise their own image. And of course, in an open access world, you can see that happen. Very often, these kind of platforms were already the strong promoters of open access. And institute platforms should be taken as a very broad container definition. It can come from research institutes. It can also come from funders who want to put all their funded research together. Of course, libraries can play an important role there, but also think tanks, anywhere where knowledge is being created and promoted further. And maybe I should go back one slide because I see I skipped that one in my hurry. The field is full of all kinds of actors. And let me explain what is what and who is who. So there are a lot of bees around the flowers, and they are the authors, the editors, the peer reviewers, everyone really active in creating research publications. Then we have butterflies, and they are the next generation of researchers. And butterflies, as they typically do, they're very attracted to new, beautiful things. They hop here, they hop there, and they try a little bit of everything. And they also try a lot of new stuff. The birds in our picture have a wider reach and a wider range. And they're the new audiences eager to learn more about research outcomes. And then you see a lot of people in the field of the sunflowers. In this picture, they are the influencers, pointing and guiding to information they like and they use. There are also scarecrows in the field. They warn against bad actors, against fake information, and against untrustworthy sources. And last but not least, but I'll get to that at the end of our presentation, they're the beehives. And the beehives are the places where trust and integrity are the basis of reliable research information. And now, with this little legend, let's look at the platforms again. And then you can see that the publisher platforms are particularly busy with the bees, because it's likely that publisher platforms will reshape themselves to be particularly attractive for authors in this competition for good authors, whereas the discovery platforms are far more populated by the next generation and by the new audiences. You see a lot of birds and a lot of butterflies there. The birds and the butterflies also used to go a lot to the piracy platforms. And it's important to state that there's a lot of user research that points that the popularity of piracy platforms particularly stems from the fact that it brings it all together. So there's also a very big opportunity there for really good discovery platforms in the syndication area. And one can even imagine whether there would be a Spotify for science in the future. And at that point, the pluriformity and proliferation of platforms probably moves into the prevalence of platforms. The preprint servers are also very popular for the new generation and the new audience, same for social media, that speaks for itself. So with that, you see here the general picture again. You see the platforms in the front. And I also want to draw your attention to the barn on the right-hand side, because the barn has everything to do with scale, because in the future of open content, there's also a new opportunity for tools that scale. And tools that scale, we listed here a few, but there will be many more, like artificial intelligence, text and data mining, data analytics, new metrics, integrity checks. And of course, the barn is also a reference to the STM solutions company that we've set up within STM, where we try to work jointly and collectively on tools that publishers can use. Another point I would like to make is that it's not only good actors who work with tools that scale, there are also bad actors who use this for, especially for the generation and the creation of fake science and fake information. And therefore, in the back, you see a dirty, polluting factory. That represents the paper mills that have become a real bother for publishers. And I'd like to say that also there within STM, we set up a few new initiatives to act against paper mills jointly, and also to detect material from paper mills in an earlier stage. Right, more in the picture. There are many, the picture is very full of many details that all merit their own story and all point at something. For example, let's look at all the people in the field. You see doctors there sharing information with their patients. You see practitioners, engineers. There's also a librarian there in the middle holding a book. There are people, there are also politicians who use scientific information, sometimes for the good, sometimes for the bad. You see the guy with the megaphone on the left side. There are families there. There are parents who want to look stuff up for their children. There's a lot there. And what we try to express here is that all this open information, of course, should come to good use in our society. Don't forget to see the scarecrows. The scarecrows warn against misinformation and fake science. And that is also very important in an open world, because as you saw in all the platforms, the different types of platforms, not all the information there will be peer-reviewed. And it's also likely that articles in their life cycle appear on different platforms and are slightly the same, or may even look very similar, but the management of the true and proper version of record becomes more and more important. Another actor in the field is the farmer on his tractor, very busy. And the farmer here stands for the funder. The funder is the one who prepares the soil, who sows the seed, who fertilizes the soil, who makes sure that everything can grow and that the harvest is being reaped at the end. There's also a person outside the field very eager to enter the field. And this person can actually be anyone. It could be a user, it could be a practitioner, it could also be a publisher. In any case, the person is very eager to enter it. And please also notice that she or he is holding a mobile device. And of course, all the information in the scholarly environment needs to be accessible nowadays in a mobile way and with seamless access, and all of that should go very easy. In the bottom of this picture, you see a few other elements that I would like to draw your attention to. On the left bottom, you see a big water tank full of DOIs, and you see a water tower with standards on it. Standards are incredibly important to scale up knowledge discovery, and therefore they take also an important spot in the picture. Another important element is the little prosperous community that you see in the back, with a school, better education, better sharing of knowledge, a hospital, better care. All of that is, of course, what in the end should be the goals of open access. Also working towards proper energy transition. You see a row of windmills there and a very green background. There's a rainbow to indicate diversity, equity, and inclusion, also very important. And also let's take a look at the air balloon, which has the globe on it, because scholarly information is by its true nature an international affair. And on this globe, you see on purpose the US and China in front for several reasons. We know about the shift in the geo balance. If you look at scholarly output, I think it's already 2 or 3 years ago that China surpassed the US in the amount of scientific articles. We also know that open access goes in a different place, in a different pace on different continents. At this moment, it looks as if the transformative agreements go faster in Europe, but we also know that there are plans in the US and in China. Okay, now another very important element that you find in the front piece of the picture. In front of the sunflowers, you see a row of beehives. And the beehives are actually the places where scientific and research information is being processed along the principles of trust, of quality, of integrity, where peer review is very important, where the bees can come for reward and recognition, for ease and speed, where we try to secure diversity, equity, and inclusion. And of course, this is a very important reference to the role that publishers can take in this ecosystem. And the result of that is in the gold honeypots that you see on top of these beehives. Okay, back to the picture again. I'm about to wrap up. You see, in fact, this picture gives 3 deeper messages. The main message is, of course, about the beauty and all the good things that open at scale can bring us. It is likely to create a new play between content platforms, as you see in the first row of sunflowers, publisher platforms, preprint servers, institutional platforms, discovery platforms, social media, more and more important. It also means a confluence between the main web and the scholarly web. Then another important message in this picture is how not only open content will scale, but to really make use of all this open content, we also need tools that scale. And therefore you see the barn at the right-hand side. This probably also means that we will see providers of discovery, of knowledge discovery, knowledge creation, knowledge generation at all different stages, applying these tools. Very important also for publishers to watch. And then the third message of this picture is that in an open environment, we will need a locus of trust because there are more influences, there are the scarecrows, there are the social medias, there's still the danger of fake science, of paper mills, and therefore the locus of trust is also something where publishers can really play a core role. And with that, I come to the main picture. With that, I'm also ready to hand over to the discussion panel. The discussion panel is being moderated by Heather Staines from Delta Think, and she will introduce the panelists to you. While doing this presentation, I was not able to watch the chat box, but I would like to encourage you to put all your questions, remarks, and comments in the chat box, and we will use them during the panel discussion. And there will also be an open session for the panel afterwards. There's one last thing that I would like to say. I mentioned when I pointed at the barn with the tools that scale that STM is doing some very new initiatives, especially on research and integrity. We're building an integrity hub, and that is being launched later this week on Thursday, and we have a free webinar on that as well. Don't miss that one if you want to hear more about that. With that, I'll stop sharing and hand over to Heather. Heather, it's all for you.
Thank you so much. Very exciting to be here today. I am not sure how to pin all of my panelists at the same time, so perhaps somebody else who is a co-host can work on that for you, so you have the opportunity to see all of them while we're chatting. As Avka mentioned, I'm Heather Staines. I'm a senior strategy consultant at Delta Think and the director of community engagement for the Open Access Data and Analytics tool. I know a lot of the names in the chat, or the participants, as Avka mentioned, but also see several new folks there. So welcome. I'm excited to get to know you. I wish we were indeed in person, but I think that time is coming. And if you are traveling, don't hesitate to reach out. So thrilled to be moderating this session today. I've been working with STM on creation of the infographic for quite some time. I'm not sure exactly how long, but some of you may have noticed that over the years, we used to focus on the tech trends. And then maybe 3-4 years ago, it became apparent to us that the trends were ranging a lot more broad. And the decision was taken to change the name of the infographic to just trends, so we could incorporate these broader themes, some of which we'll talk to you about today. I've also been fortunate to work with different STM initiatives like GetFTR and Seamless Access, as Avka mentioned, in conjunction with the person who wants to enter the field. So I'm excited to learn more about how different collaborative initiatives play out in the poster. We are going to hold questions for a little while as the panel has prepared some kickoff questions, but we do want you guys to participate. At first, please go ahead and put your questions in the chat, and if we have time at the very end for a little bit, we'll open it up so that you can ask your question in person if that's how you prefer. So putting together the panel for today's session was such a pleasure for me in that I had the opportunity to reach out to a number of folks who I knew would be wonderful to bring these themes to life and share differing perspectives. I sometimes describe the process as trying to kind of cast a reality show. It's a tough order. In a small space. You want to cover journals and books. You want to cover the sciences and humanities. You want to cover vendors and publishers, both open and commercial, nonprofit. But I hope you will agree with me at the group that we have present. I personally was excited to see the theme of open at scale. It's something that I've been working on for quite some time. But when we planned the discussion for the session, I had asked our speakers not to feel that they needed to limit their feedback strictly to open. The sunflowers do connect and touch each other across this field that is the knowledge ecosystem. And as we've been learning more in recent years, plants do communicate and interact with each other at exciting levels. So I think that's a perspective that makes sense for this discussion. So first, I'll just introduce all of our speakers and then we'll kick off with a question. So first up, we have Caroline Sutton. Caroline is the newly minted CEO for the STM Association. We're excited to have her join us here today. She's been working in the open space for about 2 decades. And most recently, before joining STM, she was the director of open research for Taylor and Francis. She's a co-founder of Coaction Publishing, which is one of the earliest full OA publishing houses, which is where I initially met her. And she's one of the founders and the first president of OASPA. She's also serving on the board of directors for Dryad and the advisory board for CESTA, which was a new one on me, the Consortium of European Social Science Data Archives, which as a historian, I'm very interested in learning more about. She's director with the Infrastructure Services for Open Access, managing organization of the Directory of Open Access Journals, and she's held a lot of other positions as well, which will give her varying perspectives on the topics today. Joining us next, and I'm going alphabetically by their first names, that's my chosen criteria to present them today, is Erin Foley. Erin has been working as she calls it, publishing adjacent role. I love it. I'm going to steal it. Since joining the Copyright Clearance Center in 2012. So in the past decade, she's helped build CCC's Rights Holder Relations Department into a team which manages publisher partnerships of all flavors and advocates for their needs at a strategic level. She's currently based in the US, where she's working as Senior Strategic Account Manager for a small group of STM publishers that range from the US to the UK. You will see that also Erin is engaged very widely in the scholarly publishing industry. She's a frequent attendee at meetings such as the Frankfurt Book Fair, the London Book Fair, SSP, STM, ALPSP, PSP, and more. And not only is she turning up at the events, but she puts in the time and the energy behind the scenes. Erin is the current chair of the STM Early Career Publisher Committee. Previously, she was a co-chair of the precursor for that committee, the Early Career Subcommittee. She is one of the local organizers of a women's industry group based out of Boston called BWIN, which I have had the pleasure, while we've been virtual, to participate in on a regular basis. She volunteers on the SSP Annual Meeting Program Committee and also the Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Accessibility Committee. Welcome, Erin. Third up is Sai Konda. I've had the pleasure, I met Sai initially when he was a fellow at SSP some years back. He is the associate publisher in the Global Journals Development Publications Division at the American Chemical Society. He started his career in publishing at ACS as a managing editor, but before that, he did a PhD at the University of Texas at Austin in computational chemistry, as well as postdoctoral research at the University of Delaware. He's currently responsible for the strategic and financial management for 11 journals, excuse me, in nanoscience, energy, surface science, and computational chemistry. He also, no surprise, is an active volunteer across the industry. He's on various committees at SSP, currently serving as a member of the executive committee and the board of directors, and he's a passionate advocate for science literacy, career advocacy, and STEM education. Last, and as they say, definitely not least, is my friend Stephanie Palbast. She is the head of open research at Brill, where she's responsible for the development of models and services to grow open researchers in the humanity and social sciences. She's been involved with Brill's open access program since the very beginning. She also gained experience with institutional open access publishing at Utrecht University's journal publishing program. Back at Brill since 2018, she's putting all of that experience together from the nonprofit and the commercial space, working on open access models suited to the unique and diverse humanities and social science research landscape. Stephanie is also actively involved in the industry and a member of various OASPA committees. She's an advisory board member to Researcher to Reader, and she serves as a member of the ALPSP Annual Meeting Program Committee, and she represents Brill in the STM Policy and Advocacy Committee. And if you're not exhausted hearing about everything that all of them do, I hope you'll have some brain cells left for the conversation. So first up, and Carolyn, I hope you don't mind if I start with you. If we take the overarching theme, open at scale, everyone knows or has at least heard now about your long career in the open access publication space. Now here at STM, you know, your remit is a lot more diverse, different types of publishers and other members. You know, what broader lessons can any content creator learn from what's been going on in open?
Gosh, that's a really good question. Before I respond to that, I just want to reflect on something that I think is really remarkable, and we really do need to just stop for a moment and recognize the significance of this. The fact that we're actually presenting this as open at scale, because if I were to go back 15, 20 years, talking open at scale really felt very, very far off. And so I think that actually is really significant, that we've got to a point where we can start thinking about what does that look like and what does that mean. So that I think is really, really exciting. And it's a thing that is very interesting for me in this year's image. In thinking about lessons, when I go back, I think what you also see in that space and in the sunflowers is that there's been a lot of creativity and a lot of innovation, a lot of experimentation that has gone into getting us to where we are today, and that likely is going to continue, not just in the solutions themselves, but I also think with business models and in how things are connected, et cetera. Because of course, in the early years of open, you were just trying to get the concept itself out there and figure out how might we do this. And so you need a lot of experimentation, but I think we're starting, and I think what we see in that image as well is that this is terrific. We're going to continue, I think, with innovation and thinking of how are we inspired to look at how we're delivering services and delivering open. But it's also, as I think this image shows, there are some lessons in terms of unintended consequences and how do we now take this variety and all of the different elements that we're putting out there together and building together and start to think about what type of governance structure do we need around that, particularly as I think this image really reinforces. We do want those finding content to understand precisely what is this, and can I trust it, and in what ways can I trust it, etc. And then I guess another lesson, I mentioned unintended consequences. We do know as well that there are bits that we're still trying to work out that aren't perfect, right? Because no system will be perfect. And I think as we experiment, we have to also be willing to say, okay, those things didn't go quite as we expected. Maybe we need to adjust a bit. I know one element, for example, is in the early days, we thought, well, APCs was a good model. We had to find a way, how do you actually pay for the labor that's going into delivering open? And we know, though, today that there are some communities that APCs don't work for. And so we're needing to think now, again, creatively as well about business models and how do we ensure that we build something that's equitable for everyone. So I'll just kick off with some of those thoughts, because I think there's other things that could be said, but I'm sure other panelists will have some different thoughts. And I know you've got some other questions to get to, Heather.
Yeah, I just want to give, thanks, Carolyn. That's great. I want to give the other panelists the opportunity to kind of, weigh in with this initial kickoff on the theme. Maybe Stephanie next.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Heather. It's a pleasure to be here. And yeah, of course, I fully agree with Carolyn that, open at scale as a theme is something that I obviously embrace from my role also, because we also, especially I think because we've seen this development also in humanities and social sciences, which, is something that we really applaud. As Brill, we have a couple of transformative agreements, which would certainly not have been possible 5 or 6 years ago. We really see a proliferation in open access books, but we will get to that in a little bit as well. And even, reference works and this kind of, really strong growth in models, in experimentation, but also culturally, researchers who are really embracing open access much more also in these fields, where I think the general, assumption was that maybe open access was a little bit further away for these fields due to, lack of funding and just different publishing behavior. So, that is now, that has really pivoted, that's completely changed. But indeed, as Caroline says, there are unintended consequences, and especially I think, but speaking again for the humanities and social sciences in particular, I mean, it's a very rich and very diverse field. So making sure that you still nurture that diversity will be the core challenge, I think, for those of us who are involved there.
Sai, comments from the journal side.
I think completely agree with what Caroline and Stephanie mentioned. I think if you see from a researcher's lens, there is an increasing acceptance for open access and embracing that open culture, increasing year by year. And you see that even when ACS co-launched the Chem Archive preprint server, initially there was a bit of hesitancy from the chemistry community because archive has been around for many, many years, and the physics community, that's their go-to place for publishing their research. And you see that now there's more welcoming openness to embracing Chem Archive and the whole concept of open. So I think it's great that there is this drive towards making this a bigger initiative in the coming years. And of course, the big picture is always scientific collaboration, and you can only get better collaboration by moving towards this open at scale concept.
Great. And Aaron, as our publisher adjacent speaker here on the panel today, I know my first interactions and first awareness about the Copyright Clearance Center is in the rights area, and I know that's something that's still key, but I wasn't always as aware of how active CCC is in the open access space. So maybe you can tell us a little bit more about that to start us off.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think the great thing about Beauty at Scale from a provider perspective is it's really the evolution of the industry with opportunities in all sorts of areas. Innovation from research methodology, recognition systems, publishing brands, platforms, how new and existing audiences are going to consume content. So it's really exciting, but it's also really challenging. I think back to probably at least 10 years ago when we at CCC first sort of dug our toes into helping publishers to manage open access and APCs. And it seems like such a simple world back then because it was really straightforward, just like an APC per article, which the authors would pay. And they might get funding, but we wouldn't necessarily have known about that. And there certainly was no facilitation of that from a platform perspective. But over the years, as we've been having these conversations with publishers in the market, there really has been this evolution of needs from something really straightforward to something that now, every deal that comes in is really different and has its own, unique properties. So how to build an open at scale landscape that's also sustainable and does actually scale instead of having a small scale, I think we're looking towards that, open at scale where it's like 70, 80, 90% of content. How do we get from here to there? So I think just managing that complexity and understanding where that plumbing comes in and then what service layers need to get put on top of that, right? So publishers have a tremendous amount of data about open access. How do we help them to leverage that data, analyze that data, and utilize it for, more sustainable models in the future? So I think my overarching comment is it's really exciting and it's also really challenging, but it brings a lot of opportunity.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. And as someone who spent the last year, up to my eyebrows, literally in data, a lot of it about open access. Yeah, I both feel your pain, but share your inspiration. I'm going to stick with you, Aaron, if you don't mind, for the next question. We saw, depicted in the image, the representation of the rainbow for diversity, equity, and inclusion. I know at Delta Think we're just seeing tons of issues come up, questions that different organizations want to answer about DEI. I'm hearing about it from librarians I speak with. We're all looking at what we can do across the industry. This is something you've been working on, for quite some time, and that you're very passionate about. What is your take on this growing interest? Have you seen changes? What are you focused on?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. And I think it's a broad question, but, at a high level, I think my take is really that there's been so much discussion and progress that's happened, DEI, and I'm going to add accessibility to that. So DEIA has really been a conversation that's been happening on our industry and also in our society for so many years. But I think the recent change has been, and recent being the last few years, has really been, I think, almost like a tipping point, where DEIA has really been brought to the forefront more than I think that it had been in the past of the scholarly communications industry, which I think is completely reflective of what's happening within the larger global community. We've come to a point where it's totally impossible to ignore DEIA concerns as any morally sound person, I think. And so I think that there's becoming this broad understanding that a more diverse, equitable, inclusive, and accessible industry is going to lead to innovation, better business outcomes, and obviously is the morally correct path. But identifying what that means exactly and what the roadmap is to get to that place, I think that's where it's going to be challenging, and it's going to take time, and it's going to take a lot of collaboration. So I think there's sort of this incoming awareness that this is an issue, but what's the issue, right? And I think that as you tease out, as you have these conversations and discussions and make new policies and make progress, there's always something underneath that, which I think is the exciting thing about DEIA, but I think it's also the challenging thing about DEIA. But I think the really encouraging trend that I've seen in the last couple of years is really the community collaboration around DEIA issues. One thing that really comes to mind for me is C4DISC, which many people on this call will be familiar with, but they were founded in 2017 with 10 organizations. Now they have over 100 signatories to their joint statements of principle. They published a bunch of different toolkits that I think are really, really helpful. And they put together some working groups to address some of these really big issues in the DEIA space. But also I think coming out of that is going to uncover new things that we need to address. And another thing that I think is really exciting is collaboration between different publishers on an individual level around things like the name change policies that have recently been coming out. That's a really important issue blocker for DEIA that we've been able to, as a community, we've been able to address through new policies that are more inclusive. So I think that community action part of it has been really encouraging for me. I think the future of DEIA is just really going to be continuing to center DEIA at the heart of everything that we're doing in publishing, from readership, research, licensing, everything. And it goes so far as to go through data, right? There needs to be DEIA discussions around data, how we get data, how we use data, language in marketing, and even in databases around master records and whitelists and blacklists and white papers. These types of things are really broad, but we can tackle them together. So I think it's a matter of keeping that at the heart of everything, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it makes sense. I love that you added accessibility. I should have put that on. And when I think, as you note, there's so many more issues than would have been anticipated a few years back. Diversity of career level, for example, is something in programming that I think is becoming more important. Sai, you've been very active through your early career in pushing for early careers. What kinds of things are you focused on right now?
So at the ACS, I think DIR, as Erin mentioned, I think two key terms that jumped out for me was, one was awareness, obviously, and then the other is community action. The ACS, we are lucky to have an editorial model where the editors are researchers and professors at universities all over the world. And so when you think of these, they are authors and they're also editors at the same time. So they really are very passionate about everything that is related to the publishing ecosystem. But coming back to the DEIA aspect of it, there were a series of editorials that the editors, all the editor-in-chiefs of all the ACS journals wrote together, and I can include the link in the chat for others to kind of read and refer to later on. This was combating racism and acknowledging the fact that we have an issue in the publishing ecosystem to kind of solve it. And Erin was talking about first step is being aware of it, acknowledging it, and then the next step is laying down the path. And one of the things that they acknowledged that was needed as taking the next step in addressing this concern was trying to be transparent and public with the data that we have currently on, okay, what is the diversity in our author base? What is the diversity in our reviewer base? The editorial boards, the editorial advisory boards. And ACS has just released this report that I can include in the chat if I can find it quickly. So it's out there for people to see, what kind of diversity is out there in the chemistry community, so to speak. And acknowledging this is the first step, and then moving on, we are kind of coming up with innovative solutions to kind of bring forward the underrepresented communities. One very good initiative that has kind of taken off the ground is, we call them like diversity cover arts. So as you know, like even though the journals are electronic journals at this point, they still have a front cover. And what we've asked is, we've put out an open call for authors, readers in the underrepresented communities to kind of come up with representative cover art that they feel, for example, like Black chemists, African American chemists, or Hispanic chemists, and they've kind of created this very nice cover art that goes on the journal covers. That was like one unique way, which I thought was one, using the graphical aspect of it to represent what their perspective is on science, but also kind of linking them to the journals. The other, very briefly mentioning the other topics, are also, we're thinking about introducing, we already have to a certain extent what we call them as topic editors, for lack of a better term. But the whole idea is to bring in early career researchers, mid-career researchers from underrepresented communities, and have them be as editors in the scientific journals, and also at the same time be mentored by the senior editors in the journal. That way, you're not just bringing in people who may not have been represented in the editorial teams, but also kind of training the next generation of researchers to be as editors, and kind of address the bias issue that we may have, that was kind of prevalent in the early years of research, and kind of make steps to address that solution in the coming years in the scientific areas.
Well, I hadn't heard about the cover art initiative. That's really exciting. Hopefully there'll be some future occasion where you can share some of the outcome of that with us. Stephanie, so I always find a way to work this into every conversation, as those of you who know me will attest. I'm a historian originally. Lots of my friends are historians. My husband's an English professor. And so I know diversification of syllabi in the humanities and in the social sciences has been a hot topic. How's Brill, and how are you particularly kind of bringing DEIA issues to light?
Yeah, thanks, Heather. That's a really good question. I mean, part of it is, of course, already sort of embedded in the projects that we acquire, in the way that and in a way you always move along with the fields that you publish. It's about, we have the Journal of Global Slavery, we have the Journal of Caribbean Studies, those kind of publications, and you just follow the conversation that goes on there, which hopefully also results in a more diverse publishing program. But in addition, of course, we started a project to make sure that all of our editorial boards are inclusive and diverse. And also, that is interesting. I was just thinking about that. It sort of also relates to the trends, which is about accessibility to our content, which is something that we've also been working on for impaired users, and that is actually something that it's a project that we started with, sort of as kind of explore what can we do, what should we do, and that is also really and we just started it this year. So I'm not involved in it, so I can't tell you the details precisely, but it is really interesting to also, because it does create a new conversation with the platform provider, which kind of brings us back to the tech side, I suppose, and also the scaling side. That you really think about, okay, how can we do this? Can we do it at scale? So it's something that we are working on, which I hope will bring some results in the next year or so.
Yeah, it's incredibly important. I've had occasion to present together with, Simon Holt from Elsevier and Stacey Scott, now Taylor and Francis. And, we assistive technology could benefit, any of us might need it at any time. And we can certainly, take advantage of some of the capabilities, that are offered. So I think that's a wonderful thing to see explored. Carolyn, at the STM level, it must be probably too many things for you to mention, but I want to give you a chance to weigh in as well.
On the diversity, equity, and inclusion. Yeah,
Yes.
that is absolutely a topic that has arisen. And I have to say, just as STM, I haven't dug into that bit for the organization as yet, but I did have a really wonderful opportunity to join a mentor circle with one of our member organizations that are doing an excellent job of working in this space. So Park, and I'll have to share more about that once I have my arms around that aspect of STM's work as well. Apologies for the noise in the background. I hear a dog trying to get in the room. So that's the loveliness to working from home.
Oh yeah, it's I've probably got a couple of them try to find their way in here. I want to come back to Stephanie because I'm a books person. I started as a books person. And we realized when we were really kind of talking through the infographic that a lot of things on the trends picture this year might jump out to most of us as being, relevant mainly to journals. So you work on books. How do the different scenarios depicted there, how do books fit into the picture, literally?
Yeah, they fit and they don't fit. So I think, first of all, it's important to discern between the book format, right? Because it does depend quite a bit on that. I think if you look at edited volumes, then you see that, contributions to edited volumes are really quite similar to journal articles. And usually what we see is that our authors are also sort of, use them, I should say, or share them similar to journal articles. But of course, for monographs, that's a really different, that's a really different format. And also, I think, in the minds of authors, it's a different, conceptually, it's a different thing. It's like their baby, right? It's a big project that they've worked on for a long time. So I think that really does, that has an impact on, what they think about sharing, but I'll get to that. Just looking at platform, and open access books, first of all, I should say there really has been growth. Of course, they're definitely not yet, there's not a big market share there yet, but I think all of us can attest to work on open access books that there is steady growth, mainly also because of funders really looking at books policies and making available budgets, UKRI in 2 years' time. That will be pretty exciting, but also new models that a lot of publishers are now trying out. We know MIT, we know CUP maybe. So all of that leads to growth. And with books, I mean, some of the elements that we saw on the image, they're not relevant. Preprints is really something that for monographs is not, it just doesn't apply. And I would say also, funnily enough, same with social media, but I'll get to that. I mean, maybe first of all, important to mention that the element of syndication, that is really important for books. And actually, already it's quite far advanced for open access books. There is OAPEN out there, which is really the established source for open access book content, where all publishers will upload their open access book content. And it really, I think, also rose from the need, not just, kind of branding or this hub where this content is collected, but simply because libraries had to find a way to get these books into their catalogs. And how do you do that if you can buy them, right? So that is, more or less a gap that OAPEN jumped into very successfully. And now I think they really are one of the most, they're the recognized source to find open access books. I mean, that might change in the future, who knows? But for now, I think it's really interesting to see that it's already there in a way. And then I guess that kind of feeding into that. So, so open access books exist sort of roughly in a couple of places. But what we do see with researcher behavior is that they are more inclined to link to their books. So they won't necessarily share the PDF, obviously, also because it's a huge thing. A PDF of a monograph is quite a big thing, which, I mean, for usage is great that they do that. So that is also, I think, a cultural difference in, you might be inclined to share your open access article very quickly, but not your book. And I think that also feeds in repositories. obviously monographs, green open access for monographs is simply impossible. So that has never, that it doesn't exist. Institutions will usually have a policy for dissertations, so that is interesting. They will be uploaded there. But for books, so what will be interesting to see, I suppose, in the next couple of years is, will these open access books actually be fed into repositories, or will universities simply continue to kind of refer to OAPN or any other kind of platform that is out there?
Mm-hmm. Thanks so much. And Carolyn, you worked on books early on and open books. Would you care to weigh in?
Well, actually, it was really interesting to hear Stephanie talk about OAPN, because I do remember that was just simply a project. And I think that is one of the things that we've seen in the open space. Things that initially were a project have turned into essential pieces of that infrastructure, either to help with discoverability or to serve other purposes. So as you say, Stephanie, I think that not just digital, but also open has created some new needs, particularly when we start doing this at scale, right? So just the way in which, how do you bring some of that content into your collection if you're a library? OAPN sort of jumped into that space. I know myself, when I was publishing books, one of the things we also noticed was just you could actually see how researchers were actually using those books, because there would be certain chapters or certain bits that were much more at least downloaded or accessed than other bits of the book as well. But yeah, my publishing of books bit is quite far out, but I think that is an incredibly important bit of the puzzle to talk about when we talk about open at scale, because monographs are still important in much of the humanities, social sciences, and arts, if we also include arts in there. There's also been, of course, some of the challenges there, because often, let's say, I can remember Peter Suber once wrote an article about why OA would come last to art history, because there's also reproducing some images within the book where our approaches to copyright for some of those images, you might get to use that image, but only in, say, 300 copies, et cetera. And what does that mean when we're trying to go at scale? So there's some of those bits of the puzzle that are still being solved, I would say.
Yeah, you mentioned copyright, so I'd love to move over to Aaron to get your feedback. I seem to feel like some museums and galleries have been recently more forward thinking about, putting their art up and making it available. But Aaron, would you like to weigh in on any of this?
Yeah, sure. I mean, not on the museum's part. We haven't run into that, at least in my job so far. So that's an excitement for another day. But I think in terms of books, OAN books, I think the challenge and the opportunity on our side is how to flow that information in. The APC collection and management of that is relatively straightforward, as it is for journals. But looking towards the future, how will we be flowing that into new deals, new access models, new readership models, these types of things? And so how do we plumb that now so that we're ready for that shift when it comes at scale? At the moment, it's not here, at least for RLSC, it's not here. But we're looking forward to the future and seeing what new content types are going to be flown into those deals, and how will we be able to help publishers meet that demand. So I think that's really where we're at on the book side at the moment.
Great. And Sai, I want to give you an opportunity to weigh in, but I also want to shift the conversation a little bit to the author side of the equation. You, I know, are an author as well as an editor, and we could see the authors depicted in the picture with the buzzing of the bees. And so, with your kind of many hats on, could you tell us a little bit more about the author and the ecosystem today?
No, I was trying to think of a good way of explaining that, and I think what I was thinking was, you oftentimes think of chemistry as a central science. Drag me away, Heather, if I'm talking too much about chemistry, because I want to keep it as general as possible. But we talk about the multidisciplinary nature of chemistry and interconnecting between different sciences, and so that's why it's called central science. I think analogous to that, the author, I believe, is very central to the publishing ecosystem. So when we say author/researcher, if you think about it that way. And like I mentioned, I've been fortunate enough to experience one side of the publishing as an author and a reviewer, and now coming behind the scenes, working in the publishing industry, it gives me a very good perspective on, okay, where are the areas that we can kind of streamline. So workflows was one of the petals in the publisher Sunflower. I think that's a area that we focus a lot on in ACS, all centered on the fact that we want to provide good author service so that information can flow as smoothly and efficiently as possible and is available to for the wider dissemination of research at the end of the day. So when you think about how these different pieces can come together, you have, for example, when the research cycle begins, when you have your manuscript ready, prepared, you've done the hard work doing the research, you have your preprint server. So you have, for example, ChemArchive as an example, where the authors can post their preprint up for the community to kind of get an initial idea of what they're trying to solve in the manuscript, the scientific problem that they're trying to solve that's proposed in the manuscript. And then when it enters the journal, you want to kind of then create smoother workflows. For example, at the ACS, we have a smooth functioning manuscript transfer workflow where, for whatever reason, if a manuscript doesn't fit in journal A, then we want to make sure that all the information gets passed from journal A to journal B without the authors having to resubmit every information, reinvent the wheel from scratch and things like that. So that has really benefited the authors from trying to find the suitable place for their manuscript to be published and get the service that it needs to be provided for it to go to the final process. And then if you want to connect the dots with open, as we have more and more open content being published in the journals, we are also thinking about the complexities involved in the various transformative agreements and the institutional level agreements, all the nuances with the licenses and everything. ACS has created an JPA tool, JPA wizard in collaboration with the CCC. So the whole idea is that as long as the corresponding author's affiliation is clear, there's a very seamless transfer on, okay, what licenses you can provide. Do you need to publish as open access depending on the funder mandate? Can you do a hybrid journal? All that is streamlined right at the downstream process so that the authors don't have to get confused and worry about what checkboxes they need to take care of to get the final product in place. So I think all these workflows, streamlining these, are very important to make sure that the author experience is maintained, and then the manuscript flows through all these different processes and it ends up on the discovery platform at the end of the day.
Yeah, and Stephanie, you hinted a little bit at sharing and kind of social media from an author standpoint. Could you talk a little bit more in the book space about how important that element is?
Yeah, well, actually, also I just want to say I completely agree with Sai. So I really, I feel what he's saying. But no, it's true for. I think what is interesting for monographs in particular is, like I said, authors really feel it's their baby, and so they are less inclined to share their whole monograph on social media or or in their repository, which they will just link to our platform or maybe to OAPEN. So obviously for open access books, and especially for tracking usage, that is really important. We always tell them, of course, as well, that they should really rather link to the platform for the usage. But they don't always listen. But in this case, that is really helpful. And at what Caroline also said, it's really interesting because you do see what has more impact. Let's say which parts of the book really make people tick. And for authors as well, it's really interesting. They really like seeing that too.
Yeah, and Aaron, authors are regularly in and out of systems that publishers work together, with CCC. How have you seen that change over time?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, and I completely agree with both Sai and Stephanie on their comments as well. But I think over time, I think it's been about how do we strike the balance between getting what we need from the author at the start of the workflow to be able to launch sophisticated, streamlined systems that don't require them to do all this manual intervention. When we first launched the product at CCC, it was all about the author. The author was the one who had to transact. They had to pay the APC. Funding was separate. We didn't really take that into account. But over time, working with our publishers to evolve that product, we've really seen a shift towards trying to eliminate the author's need to be in the system as much as possible. So facilitating more system-to-system transactions instead of author-to-system transactions. So I think that's the way that it's been progressing, and it's been really successful. I think the author has a lot of demands on their time. They need to do stuff with submission, they need to do stuff with editorial, then their article is published and they say, what is this APC thing that I have to go pay? So it kind of interrupts that process. So as much as we can help publishers to streamline that and to even take authors out of it where that's appropriate and where there are these funding agreements and institutional deals, that has been sort of the evolution on our side, is plumbing that to make that as behind the scenes for the author as possible.
Yeah, as an author myself, I wholeheartedly support that. Carolyn?
Yeah, sure. I think there's a really interesting thing with open in relationship to authors, I think, because I think one of the things that open access did, we really started shifting and thinking about what is it we're delivering. We're actually delivering a service to authors. And I think authors came into the center of this in a way that they've been there, but I think they really became the focus in new ways. And my impression is that we therefore have started to, 2 years waiting for your article peer reviewed is not acceptable anymore. Things must go quickly. We think about how easy is it for the author to go through this system to submit, et cetera. And I think we're thinking, and you see many publishers talking about how do we help that author amplify their work after it's published as well. So there's quite a lot now. And I think that those workflows for open access were initially challenging because we had to rethink our systems and how they worked. But I actually think we've come to a point with open at scale that those are actually inspiring all of our workflows around authors. I mean, and one other thought I had while we were looking at the sunflowers is I think there's one bit that I don't believe we've touched on, and that's around research assessment. And I do believe that as we moved from thinking about open access to kind of opening up the entire research life cycle and thinking about what else can we open up, in one way, that's been really positive for authors and researchers in as much and scholars in which they can start showing that it's not just this final article, but there's so much more that goes into that, and that we've got a lot more out there that one can get credit for, so that these different elements of your work you can actually get credit for. I think there's some folks who are really good with, for example, data gathering and data analysis, and maybe we're starting to build in a system there where flagging that up is going to help those researchers to get credit and recognition for what they're contributing. So, I think that will spill over again into things that aren't, we may not go to a world where absolutely everything is open, but I think that the workflows and the approaches and some of the mindset we have now due to open, and particularly as we move to open at scale, is going to also flow in to other elements here.
Yeah, I do want to leave some time in just a bit in case anyone wants to ask a live question. But I know, Sai, when we did some prep sessions for today, that peer review is something that's really, in your mind, front and center. And I think that, follow on what Carolyn says, it'll be useful to hear that.
No, I think it's absolutely essential. And, in a way, they are the gatekeepers of what comes through and the filter for making sure that there's accuracy. And we're also talking about trust a lot in the infographic. And I think all this is kind of related to peer review. And there are different ways we can think about how we can make peer review better. So one of the things, again, ACS is kind of focusing right now is they're running a pilot called a transparent peer review program, where we have 2 journals where we are making the dialogue between the author and the reviewer public. So the reviewer anonymity is maintained as long as they say otherwise. But the whole point is to get the conversation out to the readers for different ways, for different objectives. One is, they get a sense of what kind of conversation is happening behind the scenes between the author and reviewer as the information is being accessed by different parties. It's also educational in a way where you oftentimes think about the next wave of peer reviewers whom we need in the publishing industry, and as early careers and mid careers, So when I was back as a researcher, we never received any active training to be a peer reviewer. It's something that you kind of learn informally from your advisor and other things. You never really get trained on these kind of things. So having this dialogue out there in public is in a way to help the early career, mid-career researchers to kind of understand what goes into the peer review process. We at the ACS, we also kind of developed a ACS Reviewer Lab, again, tying to the concept of open. It's freely available to anyone in the scientific community to kind of register and do at your own pace. And it kind of explains wonderfully what the different processes in the peer review stages are, what you want to look for. Also, kind of tying into the whole concept of research integrity. What are the red flags that you need to kind of look forward to as a peer reviewer and help maintain the trust within the scientific publishing enterprise. I think these are different. We can talk the whole day about different aspects of peer review, but I think these are some of the things that we've been very interested in developing into the next stage as to what we can do to move this to the next level.
Yeah, I want to pick up on the research integrity because I feel like I'm hearing more and more about that. Nearly every meeting, we'll have at least a session, devoted to research integrity. Carolyn, I'm going to kind of put you on the spot a little bit. Maybe you can kick us off. What are the main things that pop to your mind
in terms of research integrity?
And why now? Why is so much?
Why now? Well, that research integrity, of course, has always been an issue. It's not the case that just suddenly with open access and with the proliferance of open access, we see this happening. However, I think we do see the volume of cases, either researchers who, and maybe they're not researchers, but individuals who have submitted content that really doesn't meet with integrity standards, or journals or organizations or individuals purporting to have an outlet that in fact is not appropriate or again does not meet standards. So I think there's a combination here of open has been a part of that. Some new business models has been a part of that, of course, and there's been taking advantage of that. But of course, technology's played a really, really important role. And we do know, I know Sai can talk in particular to this, that things like image manipulation was something that we didn't see because it wasn't really possible, say 10 years ago or so, or it would have been more easily detectable. So there is something, we also have these paper mills today, which colleagues are working with COPE and digging into and writing a white paper right now. And those are things that I think tend to hit multiple publishing houses all at once. And there is a need for us to come together and start thinking a little bit more about how we might protect the public, particularly with all of those new bees, and not the bees, but the birds and the butterflies, of course. It behooves us to be also ensuring that they know what they're coming to and that it is proper content. Yeah, I'll kick that off because I know Sai has spoken a little bit about this in the past as well.
Yeah, Sai and Stephanie.
Yeah. Plus one to Caroline. I think it's a major issue, and Caroline mentioned a very important point where we see a downside of technology almost, where as much as it improves things at a large scale, it also is kind of the dark side where it's getting harder to pick up on image manipulation, and we see this a lot these days. And that's where peer review becomes important, where we can catch them at the earlier stages and not have this published. But it's a big issue where you see, at least in the material science areas, where image manipulation is getting more and more prevalent in recent areas. And of course, we've spoken about paper mills, and there's a side of AI as well there, for example, where there are fake papers that get produced using tools in AI, unfortunately, again, the dark side of technology that we've been talking about. So I think that's where we need to kind of think carefully as to what kind of filters we can introduce in the system to make sure that we catch them at an early stage, but also make sure that we do our best in taking our peer review process to the next level to kind of watch out for these things and make sure that we publish the right content out there.
Yeah, Stephanie?
Yeah, I completely agree with Sai, and it's we're actually launching also an investigation into sort of open peer review this year, and also, I mean, yeah, it continues to be, especially in the humanities and social sciences, topics like human rights, that they can be potentially sensitive. So we have always had yeah, quite a strict policy there and really quite a clear policy as well. And we have a whole workflow also in place that, whenever such an issue arises, that we have sort of fixed steps that we can follow to address these issues. But I mean, sometimes it's just really tricky as well.
Yeah, I want to stick with you, Stephanie, because one of the things that's really near and dear to me is discovery and metadata. We hear interesting new developments like the Elsevier neural agreement, which had the backflip, which Lisa hopefully explained to me, Lisa Hinchliffe. And my first thought about, it's great that articles from 1990, 1995 are going to be open, but like, oh my God, how's the metadata going to work? And so in the world of open, it's not, the metadata is not less critical. It's really kind of more critical for some of the complex reasons that you've mentioned. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's absolutely true. Metadata is really at the heart of, I think also Caroline alluded to it a little bit earlier in our conversation, and Erin as well, of course. And I think, I mean, definitely, I would say for maybe humanities publishers or sort of medium-sized, smaller-sized publishers in general, metadata is really the core challenge to open at scale. Also, just simply because of legacy, and also simply because we sold products, we didn't sell services in the past. So our publishing, the publishing process was completely outside of the metadata that we traditionally needed for sales and for our customers as well. So you see it with usage as well, of course, with counter stats that aren't necessarily always applicable to open access books in particular. But that's a whole different topic. But it's true. And I think it's going better now. It's definitely it's learning as you go along. And the past couple of years have really seen a lot of improvements on programs as well. Obviously, Crossref is a key player there, definitely for us. But at the same time, I mean, back content, it's really almost impossible to get good metadata there. And it's also the question, yeah, do you need that? Do you want it? It depends, of course. And what was I going to say now? Yeah, and also I think that's kind of the final thing that I'll say on that is, it's not just kind of, because we didn't have to do it, but also it kind of relates to the publishing process, and definitely in humanities. I mean, sometimes we work outside of the systems that there are because of issues with fonts, for instance, or and that is something that's actually quite difficult to solve. So there are a lot of pieces to the puzzle there still.
Yeah, I think metadata brings us all together, we hope. Anybody else want to comment on metadata? I'm going to leave it at that.
I mean, if there was one topic that comes up every day at CCC, it's going to be metadata. I mean, it's so critical, from collection through proliferation to utilization, through everything that we're doing and everything we do with publishers and everything we do with our customers as well. So yeah, metadata is super critical. And I think the richness and granularity of that data is evolving over time. And so how do we make sure that we are prepared for that, and also that richness and granularity can be used because it's there for a reason. So yeah, I think what's the next big data thing? That's the open question for us.
Yeah, I think metadata just becomes more complex and more challenging over time, and becomes harder and harder for some participants in the system to be able to contribute. So keep that in mind. We're getting a little bit short on time. So I want to thank our speakers, but first I forgot something in the intro. I always forget something. I loved when Evka showed the past graphics, and the graphic for 2020, literally we were underwater and drowning. And so I went back and kind of tried to find, well, what was what was the one after that. So I've been going through STM documents, and it was in fact 2021, the pinball machine. So I'm really hoping that somehow when we do these graphics, I don't remember what the one for subsequent years is, but I'm really hoping it's the rock band, because that's something that I, for one, would love to get on board with. So another round of thanks to our speakers. They did, I think, a wonderful job at bringing that graphic down into reality for the rest of us. And we all look forward to seeing you, we hope, in the next in-person STM event.
Yes, indeed. And let me, Heather, to close off on behalf of STM, let me thank you for a very engaging panel discussion. And of course, also Caroline, Erin, Sai, and Stephanie. This is really great. Indeed, it made the picture come alive, if I can say that. And also, you're referring to many other posters that we had. You can all go to the STM website. As of later today, we'll have a link there to the picture of this year, which you can download in poster printable form. You can also fill in a form if you want in-house presentations around the trends infographic. And you can also find all the 10 latest posters there, including your rock band, including your pinball machine. So you can wallpaper it all around you. And with that, I want to thank you all, and also everybody in the audience for your attention. And I hope you'll find the new infographic a good piece of conversation and a source of inspiration. Thank you all.